Every single base iPhone review includes a batch of comments that follows pretty much the same theme. X Android phone has additional refresh rate, or more cameras, or better specs for the same or less money. And sure, a lot of that is true, but the problem is that none of it seems to be what most people care about. I mean, sure, there are more Android phones sold each year than iPhones, at least globally, but that's if you were to pile them up and include all the cheap phones that don't really match those arguments. Once you start looking into which company sells most phones, then yeah, it's crazy to think that Apple is second around the world and first in the United States by a long shot. Those numbers alone make the next comparison unfair, even if this might actually be the best example of those arguments. On one corner, we have the iPhone 15, what Apple calls as Newphoria, and what we've considered as the best update to this lineup in years. And on the other, we have the Pixel 8, what Google calls as powerful in every way, helpful every day, and what we think is maybe the most underrated phone of the year, but for 3 years in a row. Seriously, it's sad to see Pixels at just 3% of the US market share versus Apple's 53%. So the question is, which one should you pick? I'm Jaime Rivera with Pocketnow, and let's find out in our full comparison. Off the bat, if the price were the driving factor for every purchase, Pixels would have won this years ago. This Pixel 8 launched at $100 less than the iPhone 15 and is already seeing an extra $150 in discounts before trade-ins. Heck, you could even get double the storage for nearly $200 less versus an iPhone that never really sees discounts. And that's the first indication that this comparison is not necessarily that simple. Visually, well, each phone has its own design language. Apple has opted for last year's look on a feel that's far more ergonomic, while Google has done the same thing, though that's as long as you keep your fingers away from the camera visor. Sure, it has the advantage of not wobbling on a table compared to the iPhone, but it's much sharper than even its predecessors. It is Google's smallest Pixel in years and one of the few small Android phones left, but it's still 3mm taller, 1mm wider and thicker, and 16 grams heavier than the iPhone. Even if they're both made of the same materials, I'd say I drift more to preferring Apple's overall execution in the hand, but it's a tough choice as the Pixel isn't really bad at all. Now, flip them around and let's just say it would be easy to call Google's phone the winner because it boasts better specifications on paper, but that depends on what you care about most. Sure, the Pixel has 120Hz refresh rate versus 60, offers more brightness in basic and peak scenarios, and is a hair larger and can even go always on. The thing is, I favor Apple's color accuracy on this panel a lot more, in addition to its added resolution and pixel density, along with just how proven Ceramic Shield is at surviving falls versus everything else.
The reality is that a lot of people just want a larger screen.
That said, though, both phones do a good job at providing loud dual-firing speakers, even if I feel the iPhone does a better job at the mids.
I'm suspecting most people just didn't see enough of a...
Right about now, I should be saying that the gamer should pick the Pixel because it's got the added refresh rate, right? Well, I would if Tensor G3 wouldn't make that kind of pointless. Play a little Genshin Impact on the Pixel and see it barely keep up with 30 frames per second, while the iPhone keeps up with 60 frames per second just fine. Sure, Apple's A16 Bionic is a year old, but it pretty much wipes the floor with Google's latest chip when it comes to horsepower and graphics, even under the same 4nm architecture and 2 extra gigs of RAM. Now, when the rest of the things that matter both have the same base storage, but then the iPhone gives you higher options. Yes, the Pixel has a larger battery and faster charging, but they both top up at the same amount of time and last about the same. About the only thing left is that the Pixel does have a SIM tray and Wi-Fi 7 versus what Apple is currently offering. Now, gaming is a clear example that more isn't necessarily better. I mean, Google owns Android as much as Apple owns iOS, and yet the added specs you get on the Pixel are pretty much useless when compared to how well optimized the base iPhone is. Now, once you compare each platform, I'd say each phone has its own way to delight its user base. Visually, this is a matter of taste, but I will admit that I'm not a fan of Google's Material U, mainly because of the wasted space or widgets either not taking advantage of the grid or at a glance not being something you can disable. That said, everything else is pretty awesome. The Google Assistant continues to evolve in ways that make this phone more useful, even if sadly most of the best updates are only reaching the Pro model. The ones that are finally available, like being able to summarize your voice recordings or web pages, is great as an idea, but 3 bullet points out of a long article is not useful at all. Still, the little things like how this phone screens spam calls or the major things like timely Android updates until 2030 make it worth grabbing. With iOS, updates have really never been a problem, and visually I do find it more cohesive, especially in its approach to widgets. Its use of space is just right for a small phone like this one, and then the dynamic island is now here to give you contextual awareness of the services you're currently using. And let's be real, the way this phone connects to any other Apple product is just second to none. That said, sure, it's not perfect either. I'd say Siri trails way behind the Google Assistant in usefulness, and even if Google's approach to generative AI is still pretty limited, Apple still has nothing. If anything, Google's open philosophy plays against the Pixel because most, if not all, Google services work on the iPhone for everyone wanting to switch, while the same cannot be said the other way around. Now, regardless of which phone handles gaming best, day-to-day user experience is pretty solid on both. Each device is very snappy at handling its UI, even if sure the Pixel looks smoother once you enable 120Hz. Phone calls work pretty well on both devices on AT&T's 5G network as I tested them in New York City and Los Angeles, and I'd say each clings to the network pretty well, though I do notice the iPhone handles extremes a bit better. About the only thing left to compare is the cameras, and here is where things get even more interesting. Spec-wise, both phones have 2 back camera sensors that act as 3, even if I'd say 4 in the case of the Pixel's macro mode, which the iPhone lacks. Now, since there's so much computational photography, let's just say the results help me do the talking. During the day, I'd say both results are toe-to-toe. Both phones do a great job at color and detail, and that's regardless of which focal length you pick, though again, only the Pixel can do macro photography. And everything else, each is doing an optical crop for their 2x telephoto, and I'll admit the results are so good that it's my favorite for street photography. Now, what's interesting is that even if Google claims all the added computational kick when you're fully zooming in up to 8x, I'd say the iPhone does just as good, even up to 10x, making these photos usable on both phones. Now, what I wasn't expecting is for the iPhone to do a better job in low light. Sure, more often than not, the photos for each are comparable, but I feel the iPhone does a better job at not overdoing the sky or the lights. In my opinion, the iPhone was doing more of a natural depiction of what my eye could see. That being said, though, I will praise the Pixel's pro tricks, even if this is not a pro phone. Long exposure and action pan are cool, not just because you can get the effects, but also because you get a copy of the photo without it in case you don't want the result. Same thing with the magic editor for fixing a photo you didn't like, or cool essentials like astrophotography. All things the iPhone sadly does not have, at least natively. Now, when it comes to portraits and selfies, I will drift more to Apple's approach to skin detail and separation, in addition to how I can later edit just how much background blur I like, or the option to get portraits even from photos I didn't turn on the mode for. Now, once you switch to video, the winner is the iPhone, hands down. I mean, sure, colors are comparable, but once you notice detail and dynamic range, in addition to how there is less warping from the iPhone while walking, and yeah, I'll trust it so much more. Switch to the ultra-wide, and the Pixel just seriously falls apart in all the grain it throws in as well. And then there's the fact that the Pixel's footage looks really stable on the phone while you're recording, but once you pull the results into a computer, yeah, you'll realize Apple does a better job. And obviously you'll notice it even more when you enable super steady video on the iPhone, which the Pixel lacks. I mean, even the separation in cinematic video is done better by the iPhone once you notice the edges. And yeah, by the time we switch to Selfie 4K, it's an even bigger win for the iPhone once you notice detail on your skin, stabilization, and dynamic range. Seriously, Google has been improving video on Pixels, but the iPhone continues to be just hard to catch up to. To conclude, what can I say? I mean, you'll hear a ton of nerds comparing specs and benchmarks, but this is the perfect example of how implementation matters more than horsepower. Apple wins some hardware elements, Google wins others. Each company owns its own software and its ecosystem, as Google has been growing that a lot, and then the valuable perks that each phone provides. I'd say Google does a better job at making this phone a pro photography tool, but then switch the tricks off and the quality results are either toe-to-toe or done better by the iPhone. But then once you switch to video, you can't say Google does better after the tricks. It doesn't at all, and that really is a problem for the Pixel. My personal winner is the iPhone, mainly because I feel Apple does a better job at implementing the things that I care about, and also has a better track record at aging its products well. And sure, let's add the fact that it does better at third-party applications like social media apps, which again is what I do, but then again it's what the market is drifting to do as well. Sadly, Android apps continue to be hit or miss, and Google hasn't proven reliable just yet. And if Tensor G3 started off this bad against the A16 Bionic, I don't think I'll want to wait and see if the patches that were promised will help in any way. Obviously, if you'd rather save some money and gaming is not your thing, then go for the Pixel by all means. It is still a good phone. I just don't think it's a better phone than the iPhone. And the way that I see it is that if I'm already close to paying iPhone money anyways, might as well just go for the iPhone. Let me know if you agree with my assessment in the comments down below, and while you're at it, follow us on social media and subscribe to our channel for more videos like this one. You can also follow me on my personal handles to see me make the hard decisions for you, even if I know a ton of you won't agree. Please give this video a thumbs up if you like what you saw. I'm Jaime Rivera. Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you on the next one.